Like that.
Just like
So
that.
we're live. It's easy. It's so simple these days, right? No fanfare, no music. Well, especially for you, Ralph. So
Well, I don't. I mean, do I really deserve music?
not yet. I mean, you're.
Give me
Are we going to
another,
say? Are we going to jump right in
30
and say
games.
you're piggybacking off the great Richard Berg? I mean,
That's exactly right.
God, no, I'm
That's
only
fair.
kidding. Well, look, but this is so cool. So you and I know each other, and
We do.
we've had beers together, and I've met your family, and we've had
Played
dinner
games.
and all that, and played games, which more
Yeah.
importantly,
Yeah.
and now you're a big time famous GMT game designer and developer.
That's right. Well, I've been a developer since we've known each other.
Yes.
And it's just recently that I've decided that I might as well design some games, mostly because, the poor Richard, he died.
He
So,
did die.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I tried my hand. I had the thing in C3I Wakefield, and it was it was fun. And I was like, well, let's keep going. Why not?
Yeah.
People seem to like the game, so might as well.
And were you a driver behind doing the reboot with the three modules for Man of Iron to do the big box version, or is that
That's a
just
great.
a get it back?
It was a kind of a get it back in print. They came to us and
Right.
said, we'd like to get this back in print because it's you know Arquebus came out, Blood and Roses came out, and Men of Iron had been. I don't know whether Men of Iron was out of print at the time or it was really close to it,
Yeah.
and then Men of Iron and Infidel quickly went out of print after
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and then Arquebus came out and Blood and Roses went out of print. So they were like, well, it's been out of print for a little while. Why don't we, why like they've come up with this, hey, let's do all this thing with the let's put them all in one box. I was like, that's a lot of counter sheets, but sure, why not? And so we went back and cleaned up some of the errata. There had been there'd been a few some changes that needed to be made.
Right. Right.
Some things I would say I wasn't proud of in the first game, Infidel, that I worked on, because it was some things that weren't clear with the original rules, and through some people harassing us online, and coming up with why how do you do this? Well, that's a great question. So then we cleaned up that stuff. It was out in living rules, but then that allowed us to get all that stuff incorporated and try to clean it up as best we can. We included Asian chords because it was no longer in print in C3I.
Right.
And some people were like, why don't you include Wakefield? I was like, because it's still in print in C3I. And they have the rights. So.
Yeah. 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 Because I don't think a lot of people understand that how separate those two entities are. While GMT and C3I work together, it's more.
Yeah.
It's more of a partnership now than perhaps it was in the past. I think, I don't really know the full history and I don't really care, but I'm they're separate, right?
Yep, they are. They are definitely separate entities. They were a lot closer in the past. And I think Roger just wanted to do his own thing more.
Right.
And so kind of went his own way. And Roger still does a lot of work for GMT. It's just he does C3I as well. He's trying to get a lot more C3I out there.
Now, most people, unless they've listened to the Advance After Combat podcast, I thought it'd be fun to wear this T-shirt. I actually bought the 2022.
I see. T-shirt. I see that. Yes, I was thinking I should have put my big board shirt on from Game On 2014.
You should.
I should. Well, it's the problem is you can't see that it says big board on the back. So
yeah. Well, and this one, I washed it once and it's shrunk, so I'm feeling very manly now. So
yes.
I got my man boobs all pushed up and everything's like wearing a push-up bra for a guy. But so unless you're an AAC person, they're not really going to know much about you, and we kind of just jump straight into things as I always do. But why don't you? Because you're an unusual war gamer too. Because first of all, you don't really like World War II at all. You really won't play much World War II stuff, right?
I don't. Yeah.
Right.
I don't like World War II.
Right.
So I can just talk.
Yeah.
I hear your question. How about I answer that one?
Sure.
So yeah, I like to. I've been wargaming for since I was 12, I think. There was a war game store down in Albuquerque, New Mexico, War Games West, and it was right next to a flower shop. My mom did flower stuff. I went in there, and the rest they say is history. And so I'm old, so it's been a long time that I've been wargaming. And I kind of went in and out of wargaming, not stopping playing, but I just didn't have there were times when I didn't have a lot of people to wargame with. And there were times when I did a more role playing, and I've kind of jettisoned almost all of that because it got old. But then what I like to say in my war games, I like anything with pointed sticks and missiles. So it's up to about the 30 Years War, and because they still have pikes and pikemen on the field. And then once you start getting into the 60s, so the Vietnam era and that kind of warfare and on, missiles on the battlefield and really excite me. And I always love air games and naval games, as well as, and I go up into the science fiction stuff because why not?
Right. Well, now with the naval stuff, I remember, you and I, we played, I think we played a game of Fleet way back in the day.
We did.
A brief scenario. And then we both commiserated about how terrible Breaking the Chains was.
Yes.
Right. Have you tried the South China Sea game at all?
I have not. No,
Yeah, it's pretty light. I mean, it's probably enough.
That was what I saw. It just seemed a little lighter than I was looking for. I'm not famously, I'm not Clay Stone. I'm not into the super, but I like the super. I like the fairly crunchy games, right?
Yeah.
Where there's a lot of detail, a lot of systems, a lot of depth, which is what attracted me to Next War, for instance. Which is funny because then I'm all over Men of Iron, and Men of Iron is like a super simple game with originally 12 pages of rules. So,
right. Well, I mean, I always look at Men of Iron and Infidel as the ultra refined, great battles of history, sort of abstracted and fit to a somewhat different era, right? So
yeah, it's very similar, right? I think it's very similar from what I've heard to simple great battles of history.
Yeah.
Because you don't count up the TQ hits. It's your unit essentially gets disordered and then sent away.
Yeah. Now I remember when you were. Well, I guess there was some. I'm not sure how many stories you want to share out of school about Blood and Iron and stuff like that. So when you were working with Richard, that was quite a challenge, right? And entertaining, but also a challenge, right?
Yeah.
He has a few opinions of his own, or had.
That he does have a few opinions of his own, and he had, I should say, he had years of experience doing this, right? And so, what I'll say is that I found it was easy to convince Richard to make a change if I thought it would be better, and I could show him how and why, particularly with, for instance, the seizure system that changed between Infidel and Blood and Roses. We went to those counters. And the reason was the original seizure system, unless you had really hot, some really hot Sierra Hotel leaders, right? Some hot shit leaders, you didn't, you really never wanted to do it because mathematically and I showed him this mathematically, right? I did a whole spreadsheet with all the maths involved, as they would say in Aussie land. So because if your opponent had a 50% chance of success, and I only have like a 40% chance of stopping him from succeeding, and I have to roll before he does, then I have a 60% chance of failure. So he's got a better chance. He's got a better chance of failing and giving it to me than I do of succeeding and taking it.
Got it.
And that was, and for a lot of the battles, particularly in the earlier boxes, you had so many, particularly on the losing sides, you had so many leaders that just weren't very good. And so seizure, a lot of people would use it. It's a lot like trumping in GBOH. You played a lot of GBOH, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
It's a lot like trumping. It's something that people think they want to do all the time, but it's really not. Or momentum, because you get punished by if you're Roman, if you're like 2-value Roman leader uses momentum, and then you trump with Hannibal, then all of a sudden all the Roman leaders only get one activation, and Hannibal gets to run over you.
Right.
So it doesn't. It's things people think it's a good idea, and it seemed cool, but it's not.
Right. Because if it all goes
Mathematically,
whole,
there are reasons the game punishes you, right? And sometimes it's just math, and sometimes it's it's the way the system works, like in GBOH.
Right. So let's talk about your given that you're building on the base of a system already, right? So you've got some ideas around what the next Men of Iron module is going to be, and you've got a rules base and all that sort of good stuff. So rather than talk about, usually we talk about ideation and where did the idea come from for you to start the system, but we picked it out of Richard's backside and we're good to go, right? So for the next module, what are the driving characteristics for you to be excited about building another module in that series?
Well, that's a great question, and there's a lot of history out there. You'll be surprised by that. History has a long and storied past, and so to speak. And so like I got an audiobook. I used to drive to work every day, and it was a half-hour to hour drive, right, each way. And so I listened to a lot of audiobooks in my car as I did. And I got a book called The Norman Conquest by Mark Morris. And it talked about a lot of the details, and it talked about a little bit about the Norwegians invading in the north, and it talked about Hastings a lot, and then it went past that, and I was just like, it kind of fired my imagination about those battles, and I decided well, Hastings hasn't been done. Richard did an S&T game on Hastings, but Hastings hasn't been done in Men of Iron. Norm Smith has done. He did Stamford Bridge and Hastings, and then republished them under Revolution Games recently, a couple of years back, and so there were some battles out there, but it was a different system. It was a different scale, I think.
You're breaking up a little bit. Sorry, what was that last bit?
Oh, I was saying that Norm Smith had published Stamford Bridge and Hastings in his Battles of 1066 series with Revolution, and they had but it was a different scale and a different system, and so I was like, well, we've not done it in Men of Iron, and it struck my fancy, so I was like, well, how about I do one about the Normans? And so I started looking around at the battles, and I really wanted to get Stamford Bridge in, just because I thought it would be cool to have that. And I was able to fit in Fulford, which is not a great battle, because the Saxons typically, they got wiped out pretty badly. So and then I started looking around at other battles that I could include. And Richard had done a game called Simon Says in his BSO line, which was his desktop published that he did himself, and it was the Barons' War, Lewes and Evesham, and I was like, well, those were Normans. I mean, they were like 100 and what, almost just under two, like just about 200 years removed, but they were still Norman kings of England. So I was like, well, how about I incorporate that, and then I can feel like, well, Richard is still kind of part of the creative process.
Okay, and so did you? What and then how about map definition and counter definition and stuff like that?
That's a great question. So the maps, I would go to books, right? I've got a number of books about. I went out and bought books, or I had books. Like I have Charles Oman, right? That's his books about the what is it? Art of warfare in the Middle Ages. And then I would go into books, and for playtest, if I thought they were about the right scale, I would look at maps in the books and see if they were about the right scale. And in some cases, the scales aren't listed in the books, and in some cases, the scale, how do I say it, is not as relevant. Like for Fulford, nobody knows what it was like, right? There was a road that was a road because they fought along a road, and there was a river on one side and a marsh on the other, and there was a dike, right, that held back the marsh. So it's like, so I scanned an image from the book and scanned it, threw it into Photoshop, and then began to put a hex grid over it, and then began to kind of color it in to show the different terrain. And things like Tinchbry, it seemed, I can't find like the place. I can't find any good details about exactly like the terrain in the battle. And you look online, you can say, well, it was maybe here, but it's mostly an open plain. There's talk about a hill, but it's unclear whether the hill was close or far away. It's like, well, so I'll make it an open plain because people like to fight. Back in the day, people like to fight on open plains a lot.
Right.
So I'll just not throw any terrain on there at all because I can't identify any. Even if I have a hill, because it talks about the English King Henry the First, I think, bringing his guys around, like hiding them over behind a hill and then having them attack from the side, right? So then that so that's the kind of generally the way I did this. I'd done the same thing for Wakefield, and that was so I scale the image to the hex size that fits with. I generally try to scale the image to the hex size that fits with the Man of Iron system.
Yeah.
Which is like 110 yards a hex.
Yeah, and then all your order of battle comes from the books, obviously.
Right. I pull out the books, and the way I did is I would read through. I read many different instances of each battle, and I kind of would either average or they vary wildly, right? From like 5,000 to 50,000 guys, at the battle, and you're like, well, if that's 50,000 is way out. 5,000 might be too small. So then, you kind of look at what's reasonable. You look at which authors have, are looking at, which sources are better, et cetera. Right. And then you say, well, if there's 10,000 guys and they talk about having, spearmen, archers, and knights, well, then you kind of you kind of say, well, how many do I think, if it talks about how many knights there were, that's handy. If it doesn't, they say, well, there's 10,000 guys and they were a mixed bag of all these guys. Then in some cases, there's some of those, like, I don't know if have you done much miniatures gaming?
Sorry, done what gaming?
Miniatures gaming.
A very small amount.
I used to do a lot back when I was younger. Right? I knew people who owned miniatures, so it was handy because all I had to do was know the rules. And so we would play WRGW, right? War Games Research Group. And they're a group out of England, and so they do a lot of research on what the armies are like, right? Yeah. and so and what they consist of. And so they have these books on army lists. Here's a Norman army of this time period. Here's an English army of this time period. And so and here's a Norwegian army of that time period. And so I would look through there and I would say, and kind of just to get the proportionality, right? So there's this many infantry, there's this many archers, there's this many mounted dudes, right? And of course with the Saxons, they didn't ride into battle.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned that because I was looking at ancients for miniatures and wanting to work out how I would get started in that whole sort of genre, messing around with the Second Punic War and all the rest of it. And I thought, well, how am I going to build all these battles? And so I was on all these different little forums and like, oh, well, you just go do the research.
That's
we've got lists and things, and you can take. There'll be 50 different opinions on what the battle was, who was there, how many pikemen there were versus sarissas, and all this, all this other stuff. And so you can end up, I think, spending a lot of rich, fun time doing reading and research. But if you want to actually play the battle, kind of like just like put the shit down and then roll the dice and have some fun.
That's right.
There's a lot of work to be done before you, then you got to agree on the terrain and all the rest.
Well, or the right, or there in some cases people have published. Like I bought it was some kind of Hannibal's Italian campaign. It was some guys who had done a miniatures campaign based, and they'd done the research, and then they published it in a booklet for them. And I was like, well, that's great, and that might come in handy someday. So actually, I bought it kind of at random, but. So sometimes you can find it some places. Otherwise, you have to do a lot of stuff. And that's why when if you're at a game convention and you see people doing a miniatures game, right, they have put a ton of time into that because they've made the terrain, they've painted, they've gotten the figures, they've painted them, and then they've researched the battle so they can say, well, here, and then they lay it all out with some approximation of what was there, what was like.
Right. Yeah. And
it's easier for me because then I think you've seen the playtest art for Men of Iron. Like I've shown it online before, and I think you playtest famously. Didn't you playtest once, like a long time ago, for Blood and Roses?
Yeah, Blood and Roses. Yeah.
And so I make the counters in Excel, and there's no art on them because that way I can change them as much as we need to. Right.
Yeah, in fact, I recall when we did the Blood and Roses, it was back before Vassal was as useful or as adaptable or available for playtesting. So we had a playtest kit, and you had sent it to one of my buddies in Austin, and I forget his name, Charles, I think it was. And so. But we had the mobile tanks, which were the archers, right? So so that I remember that us playing that and providing you comments back, and you guys tweak the rules. But it's interesting. So that brings me to the next point, I guess, is over time, technology changes, even if it's just a little bit. A longbow's a longbow, but at some point it's not a longbow. It's something a little bit more or a little bit different, and the way they're used is different, or that formations are handled differently. So how do you make a spitball at that and work out what's the right type of unit, the right morale for that particular unit, the right capabilities for that type of unit when you're looking at this framework of a system?
That's a really good question. And so Men of Iron, right, there's just a few kind of base types in Men of Iron. There's and luckily, there's pikemen, which are sometimes they're used to represent pikemen or to represent spearmen. And so, the pikemen in general, are used to represent almost any kind of infantry with spears and pole arms. And there's archers, there's longbowmen, which are later, right? They're really kind of out later than the new Norman conquests one, but they're more of a kind of 100 Years' War, and right around that time. There's a few in Evesham, because there's Welsh involved, but really very few, no one really used them before that, or outside the Welsh at that time period. And then we had, we've got mounted men at arms, which are like, knights and their retainers. And so, you have a few to pick from, and unless you need something fancy, you can generally represent you can represent most armies from this time period, particularly in Western Europe, with that. And they're they're really fairly generic. So, and then as far as morale, the way I do it is completely unscientific, right? I look at, well, this side won, this side didn't, right? Or so let's give the side that won a little bit better. There's the shock defense DRM, right? Let's give them a little bit better that, and often let's give their leaders a little bit better ratings, so that it helps them win.
Right.
Even if they're a little outnumbered, you'd be surprised being able to activate an extra time, being able to have your pikemen, your units not get, being stouter on defense, and the enemy's a little easier to attack, makes a big difference.
Big difference.
And so you kind of get set some numbers, and I played this a lot, and so I kind of have a feel for how to do that, right? And generally you have troops that are better, right? So you'll have some good troops, and then and then some guys that aren't so good, right? So if you'll have a group of 6 pikemen, you'll have a couple of maybe -1s, a couple of 0s, and a couple of +1s, and that'll be on the side that's that's supposed to win, right? And then on the other side, maybe that's 0, +1, +2 for those 6 pikemen, and that little shift it can make a really big difference.
Yeah, to me, that's kind of the secret sauce with these games, because I can sit down and set a scenario up and play and go, oh, okay, well, these guys won, right? And you don't really appreciate the why and the how of the tuning that goes into
getting them to win,
getting the result out, assuming that you don't break the scenario or whatever the case might be, right?
Yeah. So, well, and the nice part, and so I'll say, like at Infidel, you really had 2 different army systems,
right,
often fighting each other, right? The Saracens and the Turks had way different armies than the Western European, the Crusaders, and so it was, so you actually had different kinds of units on each side. And that made a big difference to the way the battles felt, right? Whereas in Blood and Roses, it was all English Civil War, right? The War of the Roses. So it was all English all the time. So they're identical guys, right? So it's like, so it's like 2 identical armies smashing into each other. And it was, and some of those, and it can be fun, but some of those, there's not a ton of maneuver, et cetera, right? And so it's, and those battles, some of those battles can take a long time, because they're bigger, and that you just end up fighting for a long time, because you're pushing each other around a lot. In the new one, the battles are a lot smaller, because they're back closer to the Dark Ages, right? They're the Stamford Bridge, Fulford, they're pretty small. Tinchbury even isn't super huge. It's starting to get into bigger and bigger ones. So Hastings is pretty good size. I chose Civitate in Italy because it was a papal army, and I could use Norman troops from Norman unit counters from Hastings, and just have some different leaders for those same counters, because the Normans in Sicily fought essentially the same way as the Normans in Normandy,
right?
And they had the same kind of, like you're saying, the same kind of styles of combat. And the difference is then, and it was a really small battle. And so it's a nice kind of learning game where you can get in and you've got like 20 units for the papacy total, 20 counters. So it's not a big deal, but it is really setting those numbers, right? Like at Stamford Bridge, there was talk about the Norwegians weren't ready. it was hot, so they'd taken off their armor, and then they got surprised. So I gave them like a lot higher shock defense DRMs, and then I was able to include a set of counters because I wanted to have like a what if Harold Hardrada had won Stamford Bridge, and won in the north, and then is king and fighting good old William the Conqueror at Hastings as opposed to, or somewhere else, right?
Right.
And as opposed to Harold Godwinson. So then, I was able to include some counters that said, hey, these are those, if these would be the Norwegians if they were actually in good shape, right?
So that's cool. So I wasn't aware that you were going to have some extra what if.
I'm going to have some what ifs. Yeah. I've got and like at Hastings, interestingly, right? There's a lot of these places. Either there's no one knows where the battlefield is, or exactly where the battlefield is, and you can say, well, the battlefield is like Tinchbrai. It was around the town of Tinchbrai. Great, so I can make it an open plain. Like Stamford Bridge, people know it was right at Stamford. It was right at that bridge. It was right there, right? Yeah. There's no questions. Lose, same thing. Bam, they've got, they know exactly where it happened. Hastings, there's a lot of controversy between whether there's at least two hills there at where the battlefield was. And so there's a lot of controversy. There's some controversy. I don't know about a lot. There's some controversy about whether it was at the first hill or the second hill. And so I chose to, and actually here's an interesting thing, right? That what I did at first is I had a landscape version. You know what I'm talking about? Like, so it's turned sideways, right? The map, it was 22 by 34, and it was turned sideways, and it had all that stuff on it because I'd found a map that had the right scale, and I digitized it and put it in there and then colored it up, right? So for playtest, and they look like a dog vomited on the map essentially. But for playtest, at the end, GMT's got artists that are going to make it look beautiful, right? So why should I don't need to spend tons of time making it look beautiful. That's somebody else's job. So the problem I had was that with that, right, it was the back hill was just at the very top edge of the map, so it was going to be hard to do both battles, and the Normans could really wrap around the Saxons who are in their shield wall and so aren't doing much, right? It's like the Men of Iron battles where we're in this defensive terrain. The Normans like wrap around the Saxons and really there's a lot of room to flank it. So what I did, because I wanted to have those back things, rather than landscape, I turned it portrait.
I made it portrait.
Right? I made it portrait, and now there's a lot of room for that second hill, and the map edge conveniently keeps you from flanking the Saxons terribly badly.
Right.
And so it's a little bit of design for effect there, right?
That's very clever. Okay. And I guess the other thing that you do too, particularly if you can't tune the unit capabilities and things, or you've tuned them as much as you can, is you've always got your special rules for.
You can always have special rules, yes. And like Hastings, there's a special rule where the Normans if they reach a certain part of the battle where they've taken so much, flight loss, they can call a halt and pull back, and then rally, and then both sides can rally, and I've actually, it's been used in a couple of play tests. Because that historically there was supposedly like a big stop in the battle.
Right. Do you, in your settings, and I don't know if anyone else is having trouble, I just want to make sure, your sound is breaking up for me a little bit, and I'm wondering if you tuned your video settings down, maybe it's at 720, drop it down to 420, because you're not that attractive anyway. So let's just,
It's at 480. I'll go to low definition. How's that?
Yeah, and I'm just trying to minimize the bandwidth between us. I don't know if everyone else can hear you okay, but sometimes you're just getting splotchy, right? It's like
it could also be my
Or it
wife
could
and
be
kid
it could be a child online playing
playing
Twitch streaming or something.
playing War Thunder is what he's
Yeah, there you go.
supposed to
Yeah,
be doing. Yeah.
which is all good. It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Rolf is coming clear through on Facebook, so that's good. So it looks like that's
Oh,
fine.
good.
So it's just between you and me that we've got the
Okay.
issue. So
Well,
if it's not a lot and
it's
go, oh, that sounds great. It's
it's
because I don't know what the hell you're saying.
yeah. Okay.
So just keep going.
Okay. It's the fact that you live in a barn now.
Well, that is it, and I am on Wi-Fi, so
Yeah.
because
That's probably it.
I have yet to be able to effectively find the right splicing tool that will allow me to splice the Cat6 cable correctly so that I can run a cable over to the table. So there's that. But
see.
anyway, yeah, because Daddy wanted to do it himself, and now Daddy has to do the splicing, and it's not worked out very well.
I was going to say, they sell those cables, Kevin.
Well, I know I have the cable. We have the internet here, but I ran it to the other building and
I see.
where my son is, and so we didn't buy the cable with the ends on it because we didn't know how many feet we were going to need. So it's 300 feet one way and then 50 feet for me, and so we're just trying to. I've got to put the ends on. It's been 2 months, and it's like, it's really not a priority because the Wi-Fi is actually pretty good.
I've got one of those tools in my closet. I used to do that stuff.
I have 3 of them.
It's just a matter of doing it. I see. Okay.
It's just we've used a couple of them, and they've kind of sort of worked, but we've not been able to work out where this signal issue is. One of those wires is not cut cleanly, and so my son's been taking them to and from Home Depot and Lowe's and ordering online, and I finally just said, I'll wait until later, whenever later is. So anyway, huge sidebar. So so we're talking about SSRs, scenario rules, specific rules. So do you lean heavily? Do you find yourself leaning heavily on them, or do you tend to?
I don't. I like to keep things as simple as possible.
Right.
Because I also do development with Pitchland in the Next War system, and it has a few special rules in each game.
Yeah.
Just a little booklet of them, and just a page or two.
Yeah.
And so so I try to make it. I try to keep it. Right. The idea of the system is that it's supposed to be simple, and so the fewer special rules, I can put in, the better, in my view, because then you don't have to remember them. But there are times where, there needs to be something like that happened in the battle, or people say happened in the battle. So hey, like the thing at Hastings. A lot of times it's reinforcement rules. Stamford Bridge, there's the idea that, hey, maybe they sent back to the boats and some guys tried to show up. And so it's like, well, okay, we'll have rules and those are special for that scenario where, there's timing rules where, and we've done it in a lot of other Men of Iron games. Arquebus in Blood and Roses, where you roll a die and you add, you have a counter that moves that advances on free activations or something, and so you roll a die, and once you get to a certain number, then the reinforcements can come in.
Got it.
So yeah, and there was and like at Civitate, we had to put in a special rule because there was just a lot of Normans, and there was they held back Robert Guiscard, who was a big wheel later in the Crusades and the Crusade era, and he held back, and the Normans really kind of outnumbered the Papal army pretty badly, but they held back, and without a rule specifically holding him back, it was it really the Normans would move up and then flank the papal guys and just wipe them out, and it was done. Right, it was really fast, which is great, which is kind of what happened. But you want it to be more of a game, right? Yeah, the papacy couldn't win with those rules, so we put in a rule where you couldn't move those guys, Robert Guiscard and his Norman knights, Norman mounted men at arms, until some time had passed, so that gave the papacy some chance to do some things too.
Right. Right. That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And so
So
do you want to can I talk about game balance?
can you what?
Can I talk about game balance?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So what for Men of Iron, right? I like it to be this, like GBOH. Most of the time, you're not going to win as the side that historically lost, right? It's not going to happen, right? And so for Men of Iron, I like the side to win that won historically. I like them to win most of the time, right? But there's a lot of vagaries in the dice, particularly in the activation system. So it's hard to say. It's hard to, one side can win, the losing side can win because of that. And so we play test, and we play test, and we play test. And what I like to see is that the winning side wins most of the time, but not all the time. And so we keep tweaking things, like we'll add units, take away units, adjust leaders a little bit, unless they've appeared in another box game,
Right.
which some of these
Right.
have, so that we're not gonna change those leaders,
Yeah.
because
You've got a lot of levers there, right?
oh yes, there's a lot of little things to try to get the balance. And in the end, we can throw in special rules. If you ever played Arsa from Infidel, there were a lot of special rules, not just
Mhm.
because of the way
Mhm.
the Crusaders moved down the road, but we couldn't get them to win because there were just so many damned light cavalry archers, right, and just so much missile fire. So in the end, right, we just had to say, great, well, the missile fire. You read accounts of these Crusaders trudging down the road with arrows sticking in their mail in the back, right, in their hauberks, and they're just like, okay, great, I'm just going to keep going. So it's like, well, so we were like, well, I guess, it's like this, because it was a later crusade, and so just there, so we put in a special, like, we tried a -1, and that wasn't enough. So we said, well, okay, how about a -2, and that got the Crusaders where they won most of the time.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. Yeah.
And so you just go, well, those, even though they were, those composite bows were supposedly super fearsome, that Crusader armor clearly advanced to the point where they weren't effective against it, right, in the Third Crusade.
Can you just imagine though? Can you imagine those guys? I mean, just baking in that heavy weight of
And
metal.
the chain, yeah, that tight chain mail, and then they've got the hauberk over it, right?
Yeah.
So they've got the surcoat and all that, and then that would be, it wouldn't be fun.
Yeah. Just
And then somebody's riding up and shooting arrows at you.
yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
to kind of add to the whole thing.
It's awesome. It's just some of the hardships that these folks went through, and not just in any war, but just
Yeah.
in that day and age is just unbelievable.
It was particularly bad, yes. And you think about it, Kev. I mean, we're relatively tall guys, right? We're a slightly above average for America, but we would be really big dudes back then.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Because they were just not big guys.
Yes.
But they were clearly tough as nails.
Tough as nails as well. Yeah, exactly. Well, so just to switch gears for a minute with me, the next war series, I know that Iran's in development, right? So there's lots of work going on there, and I know you're doing play tests and things like that. Are you enjoying that, and is it coming along well? How are you feeling about it?
It is. It's really different from the other games, right? Because the two sides are so asymmetrical in their capabilities. So, because the Iranians clearly, I mean, their air forces, I mean, they're still using F-14s,
Right.
and which as famously, they were super great if you've got Tom Cruise flying them.
I was just going to say, I just watched Tom Cruise last night, and I did not know how awesome that they are still.
Still, that's right. They can just toast those computer generated fifth generation fighters. Yeah, stealth fighters. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. So they're not bad, but they're they're not F-15s, right?
Right.
Because we sold them like F-14As, right? They're old, and we're so the U.S. it's the U.S. versus Iran, and so it's like plus maybe the Russians on the Iranian side, maybe the Commonwealth or France if you pay for them on the American side, and so it's F-35s versus F-4s and F-14s, and that they have some newer planes, but you've played Next War; those things get dusted fast.
Yeah.
And then you're like I don't think I'm going to fly right now because I've got too many guys in the abort box, and I can't credibly contest the skies right now. Right.
Right. Well, I think that's what I did with my first play? It may have just been my first play because I looked at the stats on both sides of the Chinese and with the Vietnamese and what the US had available for turn one, and I was like, there's no point going up against this shit. We're just going to get the crap knocked out of it. So I gave up air supremacy completely. For either 2 or 3 turns, I think, and then I just waited for Vietnam up, and then boom, came out strong, and it's odd to not go into the fight, but it makes sense to not.
Sometimes you have discretion is the better part of valor, right?
Yeah.
And the interesting part here is that the side that is doing the attacking and the initial attacking, right? Which in this case is the U.S. has been provoked by the closing of the Straits of Hormuz, right? Into trying to reopen them, and is not the side that picks when it happens, right? So in Korea, it's the DPRK that decides when to attack, and then they attack. Like you said, next war Vietnam, it's the PRC that decides I'm going to attack in the dry season so that the weather's perfect, right, for my attacks. Well, here, you're like the Iranians. I'm going to stay straight out, right? There's very little reason for them not to pick the wet season so that there's storms as much as there can be, right? And you see a little bit of that in Korea, but it's especially evident here. And we're putting in a rule where you can't have storms twice, 2 turns in a row. But, I'm in one play test. The weather's been great, and I'm the Iranians, and that's not good for me. In another, I'm the Americans, and every other turn there's a storm. So it's super hard to make a lot of progress. We've blown through 5 turns, and I can't even invade yet because I don't control the sea areas adjacent to Iran, right? The Gulf of Oman, and I can't, it's a storm, so I can't air mobilize guys and send them in, right? I mean, I took one of their little islands that has petroleum facilities on it. And that's the best I've been able to do. And then my guys were out of supply because it was a storm next turn. So, and you muted yourself.
I did. Well, it's a great point, whatever it was.
It was, dude, it was fantastic, and it was insightful.
Yes, I'm always insightful. Gosh.
Yes.
No, the game that it brings to mind for me, which was a bit of a train wreck to play, but the Light Division, right? Did you ever play Belkowski's The Light Division?
I never did. No.
Yeah, well, you haven't missed anything. It's terrible, but it tried. It really tried, but it just was a little glib in its approach. But a struggle to get the right forces on the ground and then get the right air support, and then but then once the supporting forces were available, there was a whitewash, right? And it was the Russians that were beating crap out of, and the Iranians. So it was a pretty biased design as well.
Well, you can maybe not.
Yeah, well, who knows these days,
Yeah, man, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Hard to say, but and you know you look at that and you still have to make it a game, right? Because we're not. This is not a military simulation for, while Mitch may be working with the Marine War College guys, and he goes out there and they use our game pieces.
Yes.
They don't use it. They've changed the system. They've changed the system to take the commanders, where the commanders are. There's a lot more. They're making the choices, and there's a lot less nitty gritty dice rolling here for this or that, right? And
column shifts and all that.
Yeah, all that. Yeah, +1 here, +2 there. They're like, screw that, right? We're going to make it simpler so that we can get to because it's about the choices. They're trying to teach people the choices,
right?
And making those choices and gaming them out. And so the we're not that,
right?
So we still have to make it a game that people will have a good time playing. And like I think famously you bugged the snot out of Mitch for do you really think the North Koreans are fives? Do you really think they're that good? And Mitch was like, well, that's what Gene made them. He got to fall back on that.
Right.
But do we really think they're that high? Well, it's hard to say. But if they were 2s or 3s and they were attacking, they wouldn't get through the DMZ.
Right. Right.
So,
well, and he did come out with a real world version, and that was over in about 2.5 turns.
Yeah,
I played it.
Yeah, well, I played the extended build-up scenario.
Yeah,
and just that I got 1 hex out. So I attacked. I got 2 hexes into South Korea as the DPRK. I was playing some guy he's pretty good, but he's not super efficient with the system. And I got so it was, and in one place it was 1 hex outside the DMZ, and I was like, yes. And then he kicked me back across the 30th parallel, and that was turn 1.
Right.
1. Yeah, it was brutal because there was just so much allied stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And the troops are just so much better.
Yeah, interesting.
Anyway.
Okay. I guess there's lots more that we could talk about with Next War, and also it seems like you put a lot of time and effort into Vietnam, and I know that's done now. But I'm assuming that nothing more will really happen with Vietnam in terms of other games with that set of rules.
Vietnam was Nick Karp's masterpiece, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's beautiful. It's a great game. We didn't change that game. I mean, all we did, Justin made it pretty, super pretty, right?
Sure.
And we helped, try to find the edge cases, and we played a lot, made sure the rules we reorganized the rules to make them a little easier.
Yeah.
Right. To digest, because you had to absorb how to do search and destroy, and then extend that to everything else, and it was just a little bit hard. It was hard to grasp some of the concepts, and so we reorganized them, did a few other things, and just made it and made it prettier, and tried to find places where the wording and the rules
and that system's really unique to that conflict anyway.
It is. It totally is. I wouldn't think that you would want to apply that anywhere else. No.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about that sort of, because it's an asymmetric system. It has a political system laid over the top of it. It's got a lot of things going on that we've seen over the last 30 years that are similar but different. Different response, I guess, different approaches now to how search and destroy and clearing and stuff was done. So it's probably not applicable anyway. But that's okay. Ijon, I think, here has a question about reading for the Norman Conquest.
For the Norman Conquest,
bring that up.
Yeah. So I really liked. I've got a bibliography here for my game. I really liked Mark Morris's book, The Norman Conquest. It was detailed but not boring.
Right.
Right. It didn't go into, and they brought 7,357 helmets, kind of thing.
Right. Right.
And some of those scholarly books really go into the details and are hard to read because of that.
Right.
I read the Norwegian invasion of England in 1066 by Kelly de Vries. I used that for the Fulford and Stamford Bridge. It had a really lot of good details. There was a lot of it. Most of the book goes through the build up to those, because at that point that's the end of the Norwegian invasion, right? Once they lose at Stamford Bridge, they go home and that's it. And then the other ones, I had other books like Charles Oman that go into a few of the battles, and so I would read those sections.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Oh, and I forgot one book that I really fell in love with. It was called The Norman Commanders. Let me look up who made that, but it was it has a lot of really good stuff in it, and it's well written, and it goes into each of the different Norman commanders separately.
The Norman Commanders.
Masters of Warfare, and it says, who is that? Who's the author? Paul Hill. And it's also a relatively recent book, a very recent book.
Cool. All right, spend a note. Yeah, you can cut and paste that into the chat. There's a comment. There's a comment, doohickey.
I see that
on the right-hand side.
Yes. Okay, I will do that. Oh yeah, look at that. There's a chat.
Yeah. I've been monitoring it. It's mainly Peanut Gallery and Kyle and Mo, Chit-Chat and Charles and a few other guys.
Yeah, I don't see a way to actually put anything in there.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, you can't. Actually.
I can't. There you go.
Yeah,
I was like, I don't see a way to do that. I think you're lying to me, Kev.
It's just me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just you. You're just the Mr. Fancy Pants.
Yeah. You know what? So private chat down the bottom. Just cut and paste it to me. See that?
Okay.
Down the bottom. Just put it.
Yep. Yep. And one thing. So there it is. And I'll get I'll type in Paul Hill too. Paul Hill. So. And there's been a lot of people asking me, well, why didn't you do this battle or that battle? Like Dyrrhachium, or like the Normans they conquered Sicily, right? For heaven's sake, and all of southern Italy, right? Why did you choose this one battle? Why didn't you do more of those battles? And it was just that, the Hastings and other stuff kind of it struck me, and once I had. And when people are like, well, then you should do another box with more Norman battles, and I'm like, well, maybe, but it's like, what am I going to do next? It's really going to be what strikes my fancy. You know what I'm saying? Because if I'm not interested, then it's super hard to sit down and do the reading and the research, and you're going to be surprised at this, but even taking digitizing a map out of a book, or and then changing it, and then making, and then coloring it in and doing all that stuff, and moving it around, because a lot of them have more contour lines than we really want. We don't need contour lines at 25 feet, right? That's ridiculous. So you have to change some. You have to decide, well, I'm going to use these contour lines and not those. It can be it's very time consuming, and so if I'm not interested in it, then I'm just not. Then it's hard to sit down and do it.
I can appreciate that, because we went through an exercise with Lock and Load where way back before it was sold to David, and a friend of mine, his friend was going to build a Korean module.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went through, and I had a bunch of books on the Korean War. And so we were going to do some scenarios. So I was like, well, I've got the Semper Fi module from TCS, and I've got, this book and that book. And so I sat down and started trying to look at it, and I was like, oh, man, this is like real work, right? You know,
Yes.
this is not fun.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that 100%. How that would be just, and also, is it right, and is it right enough, and how right do you want it? And if
Yeah.
you're anywhere on that spectrum of OCD where you want that,
Yep.
you want things to be accurate or
Yeah.
versus relatively representative,
That's right.
then
Well,
that's a huge difference, right?
it's a huge difference. And Kev, that's one thing I actually. It's so much easier to do the medieval or ancient battles because you could say, well, I synthesized several. You can look at it and say, I can synthesize several people's take on the battle, and this is my take on the battle, right?
Right.
Whereas, with Next War, if Poland buys F-35, then Poland buys F-35s, and you'd better add those in, right? And you get people complaining about, well, this technology, they're upgrading, these guys, Germany's upgrading their tanks, but, they should be strong. Their tank units should be stronger. And it's like,
Right.
well,
Right. Then
really, should they, or is it?
You get that whole nationalistic thing going on too, where
Yes.
oh, but no, the Dutch had 4 brigades.
Yes.
Okay, dude, right? You have 4 brigades on paper,
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. Right. How many can they field? Right. How many of those are reserves? Yeah.
Which is the constant sort of thing in that on Facebook, there's a modern warfare group that I admin, and the constant conversations around order of battle and relative unit capabilities that we're seeing. So seeing T-80 shooting at T-64 BVs, and
Right.
was that a heat round or an APS, whatever it is, SDS round, and why didn't the contact one block stop it, and all this whole shit show of
Well, I mean, even Mitch and I, with the whole Ukraine Russia thing, right? We had some discussion. We had some good heart to heart talks about things, because he was like, well, he was concerned that maybe things had changed, and that armor wasn't quite so dominant as it has been in the past. And I was like, well, but is that true, or is it the Russians just aren't using it very well?
Right. Exactly. Tactics.
Tactics. And
Training.
So, do we want to say the Russians, wouldn't learn from this if they went to like a next war Poland, right? If they attacked into Poland or the Baltics, would they have learned from this? Well, you have to say, well, they should have, right? Because I mean, they learned in World War II, right? They got their butts handed to them in 41, and then they started coming back, right? They figured out how to actually fight. And so, maybe that would be, hopefully they would, we could say, well, this is a hypothetical game, so they've learned their lessons, right?
Right.
So let's not go throwing a ton of changes out there, and even if,
and then once again, you lose the game aspect, right? I mean,
you lose the game aspect, yeah.
So
and a lot of those, like, there was a particular concerns. People were like, well, the javelins and the Carl Gustavs and all that have just made armor irrelevant. Well, but even in the open, it's like, well, almost all of the ambushes you see that are successful, because you never see the unsuccessful ones, because those guys are dead. Are all there's a tree-lined road. It's in an urban area, right? So there's some place for those people with those ATGMs to hide, right?
Right.
So,
well, the thing that has impressed me that I was unaware of the capability was the what I would call intelligent or directed artillery. That to me has been enlightening, but also I've also heard that that stuff's been around for a while, and we've had that capability, but we've never used them because
we didn't fight people who we needed to do it.
Haven't needed to, because we haven't been fighting dudes with tanks. They've all had kind of like a pickup truck. So there's that, and also the shells are really expensive. And here's the other thing with all that is that So two things. One, we're looking at a TikTok war. We're only seeing 20-second clips of what's going on, and it's all very disjointed and there's no context. And then the second is these guys are being funded by half a dozen countries. So no one who goes to war, if the US goes to war, they're going to have ammo shortages, or if the Russians go to war, they're not going to be able to give every guy. You see these guys running down a little laneway with 4 javelins, they're like, I mean, it's not pretty, it's not very realistic to expect that level of capability and logistical support to be available, right? Anyway, I think there's a lot more to it than what we're seeing.
And we did, and and Mitch and I talked about maybe changing the way the Russians supplied their troops, right? In like next war, once you get to the advanced game, and Mitch put some serious thought into changing how the supply rules worked for just the Russians. And I think, and in the end, we talked about it, and in the end, we decided that next war is hard enough to play and learn.
Right.
And having 2 separate supply systems might be just that little extra hard.
Yeah. It's like the supplement to insurgent rules, right? I mean, I'm not a fan of them, but
neither am I, to be honest.
Yeah.
I played them, but it's play tested, right?
Completely different game, right?
So, it is. It's a completely different game, and it's not the game that I want to play, right?
Right.
If I want to play that, I'll play next Vietnam, right? Because I can. It happened, and I can play it. And I saw somebody asked, and Nick. We talked with Nick, right? And Nick got the okay to reprint Vietnam, and Nick helped answer questions that had been lingering out there because we Mark Evans had like hundreds of page FAQ, right?
Yeah.
And we went through that and went to Nick and said, hey, let's get a definitive answer on this, that, the other thing, and we've marked those in the rules that say, hey, we talked, this is the way Nick wants it to play.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, because it was his game, right?
And you got to respect that, right? There's a point where you go, I'm not changing it to make you happy. I'm changing.
That's right.
The game is the game, and it plays the way I want it to play.
Play it or don't play it, right? If he's happy with it, and like you could add on all sorts of Chrome. We know a lot more about what the NBA had. What the BC had. We know a lot about even the American order battle and how this armored unit got these different tanks at this time, so we could have different counters for them. You could pay more to change those, and discussing things. I didn't discuss things with Nick, but Mitch talked with Nick, and Nick was like, let's just keep it the way it is. We don't need that level of Chrome. There's enough going on that people, players don't need that.
Yeah, there's enough going on, exactly.
And I think that's a brilliant move, right?
Well, also I look at the next war system, and you came up with the idea of strike packages, right? So which is an interesting idea, but I still kind of I still like the original version.
I like
lining all those guys up and going for it.
Mitch says it's probably a lot more realistic that it's you have those strike packages, but I'm like, yeah, but I want to be bombing things with my A10, right?
Right.
I don't want to have a strike package. I want to have my A10s cleaning somebody's clock, even if it's me.
And you don't get to make the burp noise if you don't have.
That's right. You don't. No, not at all.
Right, exactly.
You don't.
Well, dude, we've done an hour.
It has a long time, and it's super late where you are. Yeah.
So I know it's not late for you, but it is getting late for me. But I really appreciate it, and I'd be if you end up doing another module on the Men of Iron system, by all means, let's get you back on. Or guys, you and Mitch want to come on and talk
Up
about
next
the next war, Iran.
Sure.
We can do that sometime too. We'd love to. And obviously, Mo would have you on as well. We'll get you on Mo's channel and do that too.
Okay.
Yeah, be cool. But appreciate it, man. Thanks for hanging out.
All right. Yep, Kevin, it was always a pleasure, and I will see you in October.
We will, Joe. But yeah,
All right, bye.
4 weeks, right? We're going to do it in a
Yep.
couple of weeks.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to
Exactly.
it.
We're
Yeah,
gonna play
and
Vietnam, right?
yeah, yes. Now that Mitch is not coming, that may.
Yeah.
We should. I don't know if your schedule has changed at all, but no, you haven't. All right, dang. All right. Well, I was looking. I've got some pickup I need to do now. I think the real reason why he's not coming is he didn't want me to beat him at Green Beret. So.
He said something about that, but I think it was the reverse. But okay, he didn't want to beat you too hard at Green Beret.
All right, man. All the best.
All right, dude. Have a good one. Bye.